Okay, so I can see the numbers are still going up, but I'm just going to make a start with a few introductions. So welcome to today's webinar. I'm really delighted to be joined by colleagues from AbilityNet and also by GeniusWithin. We'll be meeting them in more detail and finding all about the services that they provide in a while, but we're joined by Jackie Wallace, who is Commercial Director for GeniusWithin, and Charlie Ecton, who's a consultant psychologist. So welcome to them, welcome to our audience. I'll just run through a small amount of housekeeping and then we'll get going with the webinar. And then at the end, I'm hoping that there will be some time for some Q&A. Hang on, I'm just working out how to move on. Okay, so in terms of housekeeping, as you can see, there are some captions popping up at the bottom there. They're coming from within PowerPoint, so you will see some odd interpretations of what the speakers are saying, but generally speaking, it's pretty good at capturing what's going on. We've turned off chat today. That just makes it easier for us so we can keep the chat for any technical issues we have. But please do use the Q&A window to ask any questions that you've got. And as I say, we'll be coming back to those later. Once the webinar's finished, everybody will receive, keep an eye on your inbox, the slides, a transcript and a recording will all be made available. They'll be posted online and you'll be notified via email. So all the information that's shared during the webinar will be made available afterwards. And we'll also be asking you for feedback to ask any follow-up questions. So just in terms of what we're going to cover, we're going to introduce AbilityNet and how we can help. Then we're going to hear from my colleague Rina about her personal experiences in the workplace. Then, as I said, we'll be hearing a bit more about GeniusWithin and the services that they can provide, and a bit of discussion around this question that they've posed as part of the webinar, which is the new normal here to stay? And we're going to look at how everyone's been adapting to working from home, working in different ways. And I guess part of that question is, what do we want to keep? And what have been some of the challenges around that? So we're going to run through that. They'll be talking about, as I say, the services that they can provide. And then we'll just come back to a new service that AbilityNet has launched during this time that can be helpful to people. And then we'll come to our Q&A. So that's what you can expect. So I'll just briefly give you an overview of AbilityNet. So our vision and our mission is to create a digital world accessible to all. We work with people with pan disabilities and older people, supporting them at home, at work and in education. We have a network of over 300 volunteers. They've all had a police check and we're offering remote support at this time. They are really skilled in terms of IT support, but they're also really patient, and our approach is to empower you to do the things you want to do. So they won't just do it for you. There'll be like a learning process alongside that as well. We've recently changed our free helpline number. The new one is there, so you can give us a call during office hours. And then there's a variety of ways that we offer support online. So an example of that is My Computer, My Way. And it will give you information on how to make adjustments to your technology for your particular needs. So, you know, for example, if you wanted to make the text bigger on screen on a tablet or a computer, then you'll be able to find that information in there. We have a product called My Study, My Way for students, and there's a series of free fact sheets that you can download, and we can also help you with a disabled student assessment, and all the links are there. So just briefly to give an overview of the difference that we make to our clients. I'm not going to go through all of these, but one thing that's particularly relevant at this time is that we know that using technology can really bridge some of the physical distancing gaps that we've got at any time. And that intervention from one of our volunteers, 69% of people say that they feel more isolated. And interestingly, 78% also find it easier to manage daily life. And I think that's quite important at this time when people are trying to access public and private services online. And I know that's probably something that GeniusWithin will come back to as well. So we're running a series of these webinars. Next week's will also be looking at neurodiversity. It'll be same time on Tuesday, and that'll be looking at it more from kind of a social perspective and how various individuals and organisations are embracing creativity as a way of making new connections. So do please join us next week if that's of interest as well. So before we get going, I just want to hear a little bit about who we've got here. So I'm just going to launch our first poll, which hopefully will pop up on your screen. So just want to find out about the people who've joined us today. So if you are someone who has neurodiverse needs, which of these apply? And you can tick multiple choices here. So we've got autism spectrum condition, ADHD, acquired neurodiversity, DCD, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, mental health, Tourette syndrome. It may be that you're here because you're an employer and you're looking to support people who may have some of these needs. Option for none of the above or other. And if you want to pop some extra information in the Q&A box, that would be fantastic. It'd just be great to know a bit more about who we've got joining us today. So I'm just going to give it another few seconds to make sure that everyone's had time to read those through and answer, and then we'll be able to see what sort of results we get from those. Okay, so I'm just going to end the poll now. So let's see what we've got here. I can see the largest number is none of the above, which instantly makes me curious. So if anyone wants to pop additional information in the Q&A box, please do. After that, I can see that we've got 22% of people who are employers joining us today, 15% of people with DCD or dyspraxia. We've got 14% of people who are saying that they've got mental health issues. So, sorry, I forgot to share the results. Doing that now. Just leave those for a bit. Okay, and I have gone to the wrong place. Oh. Sorry guys, got some technical issues of my own going on here. So now I'm going to hear from my colleague Rina. Rina, are you there? You just pop yourself off mute.
Hello.
Hi there. Welcome to the webinar. I know this is something that's of real personal interest to you. So could you maybe just talk to us a little bit about your role at AbilityNet and why you wanted to work for us?
So as an accessibility and usability consultant, a large part of my role is to test websites and mobile apps to see sort of how accessible they are, what issues are there, and to report on what I find. I wanted to work for AbilityNet because we do great work in the community through the team of volunteers, and also in the kind of side of web accessibility. It was something that I got very interested in as I was teaching myself how to make websites. And then the other part was that I saw AbilityNet, because you're so involved in kind of helping disabled people and like web accessibility. I thought that it would probably be a really good organization for people with disabilities, and I thought that it would be really accommodating and flexible, and they really have, without the accommodations and flexibility that I've been given, I simply wouldn't be able to work full time.
Yeah, okay. So you have Asperger's. So how has AbilityNet adapted to make things easier for you? What's that flexibility look like?
So they've allowed me to work from home full time as part of my role, which means that I can work full time, full stop. I have tried to do office-based jobs before, and I just got overwhelmed with the kind of the unexpected changes of people being there or not being there, the noise and light levels in the workspace, because they can really affect my ability to concentrate with regards to like sensory overload and things. But also they've just been really flexible. My line managers contacts me sort of every week or 2 weeks just to check how I'm getting on, see if I've got any questions. Just really supportive. You know, I didn't have to ask them for an access to work assessment. They actually suggested it in the first place. Excuse me. And it just kind of really supportive and not kind of holding back on what they could offer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's brilliant to hear, and I think you've touched on a couple of key themes that I know GeniusWithin are going to come back to, and that is that notion of flexibility and working from home, and lots of people have had to work from home, but it's great to hear that that was something that you were able to make a choice about. And I think it comes back to that, the thing that sits underneath that question that GeniusWithin have posed, which is like, what do we want to keep from this time as we go forward throughout the pandemic and beyond as well. So thanks very much, Rina, for sharing your personal experiences. And I know we'll come back to talking about remote assessments later as well. So I'm going to move on now. So is the new normal here to stay? This is the question that GeniusWithin, I know, are keen to discuss with us. So I'm going to pass over and say hi to Jackie now. Jackie, welcome. There's a quote here from your CEO, Nancy, which I think sums up the ethos of GeniusWithin. So yeah, tell us all about who you guys are and what you do.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks Sarah and AbilityNet for having us today. So in case anybody isn't aware of GeniusWithin, just a couple of things about us. So we were started in 2011. We are a CIC. We support all adults across all neurodiverse conditions, and we support them both in work and for those who are not in work and in the criminal justice system. Our services are delivered by a team of psychologists and highly trained ILM coaches, and all of our workplace recommendations are based on high-level academic research and rigour. In fact, we spend a lot of time collecting impact data to make sure that everything that we do comes from a very data-centric position and with evidence to back up all of our recommendations. So today we're primarily going to focus on the work that we do for our clients that are in work, and we work with a whole range of organisations, from very large corporates right through to SMEs and public bodies, and as I said, we support through all neurodiverse conditions through awareness training, assessments, and also via one-to-ones. And we are, our purpose really is to help everybody to be able to work at their best more of the time. So with the impact of COVID-19, helping people who are working with neurodiverse conditions, we really wanted to speak today about the world that we're actually living in right now, and how we can support long term as we find ourselves in remote working. And my colleague Charlie Ecton, who is a consultant psychologist, sorry, always get that wrong, is going to talk to you more about our view and our work with the neurodiverse communities and how COVID-19 has impacted.
That's fantastic. So specifically you're supporting adults, and there's a focus on workplace there, isn't there? Absolutely. So all neurodiverse conditions and in-work support is what we're going to focus on today. That's fantastic. Thank you. And as we said, you'll just need to prompt me for next slide because I'm driving today. But I know Charlie now is going to talk us through, I guess there's a lot of talk pre and post COVID, and what we're talking about today is bridging that gap. But you've got some insights which have come from, as Jackie says, a lot of the research that you've done, and just give us a background of the type of things that you're interested in and what you're talking about. So I'll pass over to Charlie now. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. So I love this slide. I was hoping that we might start here because for me, this is really the essence of Genius Within this slide. What it does is it shows all of the strengths behind different neurodiverse conditions. I don't know, I'm sure lots of people on this call will know all about neurodiversity, and I'm thinking maybe one or two people might not. So just a couple of things to bring us all on the same page there. So neurominority, neurodivergent, neurodiverse, they all mean the same thing. And neurodiversity we can look at in two ways. So firstly, there's the kind of neurodiverse overview of us as Homo sapiens, and there is diversity within our cognition, and that's been selected for over thousands of years. It's advantageous to us as a species to have that kind of difference. And then at an individual level, so my typical day job is going in and assessing people for their neurodiversity, so strengths and weaknesses across somebody's cognitive profile. So what we find is people have strengths and weaknesses anyway, but people who are neurodiverse have greater strengths and weaknesses across their cognitive profile. So I might make recommendations to help people with the help of AbilityNet, put some things in place to help with weaker areas. But as a company, what we really focus on is the strengths. So my background is education. So I can say hand on heart that in education, what we do really well is point out what's going wrong. So we talk about the difficulties, the weaknesses, the things that aren't doing what we want them to. And what we actually have to do is prove how bad somebody is before we can get them help. And what I love about business is we're saying, okay, so you're struggling with these things in these areas. So here are some adjustments for that. But look at these amazing strengths that you have. And in business, if we don't pay attention to the strengths of different neurodiverse conditions, then we're losing a whole load of talent. So that's the business argument for looking at the strengths and the weaknesses. If you just jump on, Sarah, I think.
Yeah, before you move on, Charlie, I just wanted to jump in because I'm aware that we may have some people with visual impairment. So I was wondering if you could perhaps, so what we've got on screen here, guys, is a picture of neurodiversity, and it's pulling out, as Charlie says, some of the strengths and weaknesses around particular neurodiverse types. So I was wondering if you can maybe just read out one or two for us for people who might not be able to see this slide on screen.
Yes, of course. So typical strengths associated with dyslexia, for example, are visual thinking. And that means that they're much more creative, they're able to see things 3D, it allows them to problem solve better than people who aren't dyslexic. People with ADHD are able to hyper-focus, they're also able to turn their attention between things very quickly. What I would say is no two people with any one of these conditions are actually the same. So anybody on this call might think, well, that's not me, and that's true, but it's just a generalization. Also, people with autism have the ability to look at fine detail and concentrate in the main.
That's fantastic. Thanks for doing that. So yeah, moving on to some insights now.
Yeah, just some quick fire statistics that I think are really interesting. So 83% of disabilities are actually acquired, and that's at the average age of 53. And I think what's really important to know about disability is it's intersectional. So what I mean by that is it actually cuts through all other areas of diversity and inclusion. It affects a huge number of people, lots of people on this call, lots of people in your organisation, and also across a lifespan. And if you just move on to the next slide, we've got some more stats here. That actually 90% of disabilities are not immediately visible. Typically 1 in 7 have mental health needs, and the estimate of the cost to the economy is £26 billion. And if you just go on one more slide as well, because I don't want to spend too long on
yeah, sure. That not visible is interesting, I think, though, Charlie, isn't it? Because many of these things will only have come to light with people working from home. Those conversations may not have happened until now.
I do think that's absolutely the case. I think that the situation has really, for some people, pulled out some of the things they weren't managing before, or masking, and actually for other people it's actually helped them, as we're going to see in a wee while. So 28% of the long-term unemployed are dyslexic. And if you've never heard that statistic before, I think you'll find that's quite shocking, along with 10 to 15% of autistic people having a job. So 85 to 90% of autistic people don't have a job. Now, we're not going to look into the mental health behind whether you work or not, but I can tell you as a psychologist that it's absolutely tragic that figure is the case. I know these statistics, so it's less shocking for me. But I think what still continues to shock me is, even though we know these statistics, I think most people on this call will be aware of the Equality Act. I think most people on this call will think, okay, but there are things being done. And what's actually really quite shocking for me is that since the Equality Act has been put in place, there's been no change in the 30% difference between employment for people who are disabled and the general population. And that for me shocks me every time I think about it.
Yeah.
So is the new normal here to stay? So I've just painted a picture of what we actually really call exclusion. It's not really inclusion, and as I say, it's not changed. And so all of a sudden, March 2020, everything went weird, didn't it? So that's where we were, and the question is, where are we now? What's changed, if anything? I think we'll all agree things have changed. What I would say is, as a research practitioner, it's a bit early to say with the data what's changed and how, but what we do know is that we've gathered a lot of anecdotal evidence as a company. We've been looking at a lot of social media self-report data. I know that Jackie's had a lot to do with that, and she's collected a lot of views. And I think the most important thing is to say that it's different for everybody, and that is going to be key to the adjustments that we make. So I know that you've got some questions for me next, Sarah. I don't know if you want to skip on.
I have, yeah. So I guess it's just to dig a little bit deeper into what you're talking about. As you say, those experiences are very personal anyway, and everyone will be experiencing this unusual time in a different way. But if you could kind of, do you have any of that anecdotal evidence? Perhaps pull it together for us and tell us how you feel it has been impacting people with neurodiverse needs in particular.
Sure. So one of the things that people might have seen was that quite soon into the lockdown, the head of Twitter said, right, that's it. From now on, you can all work from home. This is working really, really well. And clearly they thought that was a great announcement to make. And I know that for some people that would have filled them with anxiety, the idea that they wouldn't go back to the office. So I'm going to take the liberty of sharing some anecdotal evidence of my own, actually. So within GeniusWithin, we've got a good representation of people with various neurodiverse conditions. And I just want to contrast the experience of a good colleague of mine who has autism. So typically at GeniusWithin, we have monthly meetings, and we will all go down to headquarters and we'll sit around a round table and we will go through all the business, and it takes several hours. And she finds that quite overwhelming. She finds the journey there overwhelming. And what she's found since we've been locked down is she's not using all her energy up getting there. And she's set her Zoom so that she can only see the person talking. And there's a feature of Zoom that I'm sure you're all aware of that means you can do that. And if people talk over one another, Zoom will focus in on probably the person who's loudest, I'm assuming. But at one time, you can only ever see one person, and she finds that great. My experience, I do have ADHD, but my experience of having ADHD is that I want to take in all of the information all the time on Zoom. So I don't want to see what one person is saying. I want to see what everybody is thinking about what one person is saying. So I want to see everybody's reaction to what's being talked about. I'm then taking in what's being said and everybody's reaction to it, which means that I find it absolutely shattering doing Zoom calls, and no two people are alike. So what you've got there is already within one working team and a group of people that work well together, really different needs. So my colleague really wants to do lots of Zoom talks going forward. I can't wait to see everybody in person. And what we're going to find is this balance, the balance of making it right for everybody, and hopefully more flexibility, which is what the key thing is for me.
That's great. And I think you've touched on some of the other questions I've had there in terms of video conferencing. Everyone deals with that cognitive load in a different way, and about choice and flexibility, which is really important for employers to embrace. I wonder if you'd just like to say a little bit about that notion of making reasonable adjustments in terms of in the office. I think it's something that people recognize they have to do. Perhaps just to talk about the, you know, as you said, there's a real need for making those reasonable adjustments, and what types of things might help people with those needs now they're working from home.
Absolutely, and I think this is where AbilityNet and Genius are a really nice fit, actually, because we both know the things that work. One of the things that we spent a lot of time researching is neurodiverse specialist coaching. And if you just flick onto my next slide, what's really great about coaching is, regardless of what people's needs are, or sorry, conditions are, we found that they all want the same thing from coaching. And this is fantastically useful. So as you can see there, I won't read out all of the statistics, but as of March, 92% of people wanted help with memory and concentration. 67% of people wanted help with well-being. I'm going to speculate that that might be higher now. I'm going to speculate that. I might be wrong. But what we find is when people have specialist coaching, 95% of them stay in their job if they're having work problems. 25% of people get promoted. 75% of people report self-improvement. And 47% of supervisors notice the same improvement. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's not that supervisors don't rate people as well as they're rating themselves. It's just that typically we find that people have low self-esteem when they first talk to us. And so that's why we have such a huge increase after coaching. And if you go on to the next slide, and this is very much where you guys come in, things like assistive technology. So I'm sitting to you now with dual screens, which makes it so helpful because I don't need to keep flicking between screens on one laptop. Environmental flexibility. So all of these things we've researched and we know that they work. And what we need to do now is consider two environments at the same time. So if at work you need dual screens, then you're going to need them at home. We thought for a few weeks people might manage sitting on their old piano stools, and actually what we do know is you need an ergonomic chair if you're not going to have a massive chiropractor's bill. That's if you can get to the chiropractors. So always it's about having this open mind, this flexibility, chatting with people and seeing what they need. The only thing that I would say is the real difference is made when we don't do these things reactively. So, you know, you guys know, we know that if the same things are coming up, the same needs are coming up, if we can put those things in place before things go wrong, then that's going to have such a massively positive impact on people's well-being and mental health.
That's great, thank you. And I think what you're also highlighting is the importance from an employer's perspective of working at it. Really resonates with the news story I saw about the health service and how they've had to work so hard to combat attrition in nurses and how that's really come down. I think what you're saying there is that by working at it, you can improve staff retention, you can keep people who've got great skills in the workplace. So, which I guess brings us on to this really. What can we learn from this experience? I think in a time of crisis, it brings everything to the fore, doesn't it? What do you think we're learning, and how and are these changes sustainable?
So it's interesting, isn't it? And we've got this phrase, the new normal, and I kind of think of it as the next normal. And then we're going to get another normal after that. So I'm just looking at your slide there, work-home boundaries. So for me, my work-home boundaries are being challenged at the moment by my cat and my dog wanting my attention. And I know that for lots of people on this call, it's not just about how am I managing to work in my home environment, it's how am I managing my family whilst I'm working in my home environment. So there was an article in The Observer a few weekends ago basically saying that we're returning to 1950s gender divide with all the women picking up educating the children and doing all the housework. And it's an interesting thing, I think, that at the moment, whilst people have children at home, for those people who do have children, that's not going to be the next normal. So once people get out of the house a little bit more, and those who can work from home settle in, that's when they'll get to see, actually, is this sustainable? Can I cope with this? What does it mean for me? And I envisage us seeing a little bit of bouncing in between different types of normal. I don't think we'll go back to what we had before. I think that there's a lot of talk about the risk assessments of going back into the office, and Jackie and I were just talking about this morning, that those risk assessments are focused primarily on the physical side of things, but there's not a lot of talk about the psychological risk assessment of being left at home while some of your colleagues were in the office, for example. So as I said, it's all very well your CEO saying that you can all work from home, but how does that work if you're in the sales department? You know, if you have ADHD and you need a dopamine hit and the momentum of working alongside colleagues and feeling their excitement by being in the same room as them, then how do you get that if they're somewhere else and they're not there? So
yeah, and I think one of the things that you've talked about with those personal examples earlier is that way of maintaining social connection, and we've kind of all gone to this Zoom environment, which I know I personally do also find quite tiring. So again, it's about a balancing act, isn't it? You're treading that line between maintaining social connection and not overwhelming people.
It absolutely is. And for me, it's also about challenging some of the social norms. So we all know that meetings should last for an hour, don't we? Because there should always be an hour meetings. What a load of nonsense. So, you know, I feel that if you've got a really intense situation in which people are constantly looking at Zoom, then let's change the new norm. Let's say, well, actually, maybe half an hour is enough for everybody, regardless. And if we can't get through that meeting in half an hour, then we need to change the agenda. And it's just because we've done certain things in a certain way doesn't mean that we should keep doing them that way. And I know for a long time as well, sorry, I'm wabbling on, but for a long time, I've been chatting with managers when I've gone into workplace to make adjustments for people, and I said, well, actually, this person could really do with working from home 2 days a week. And they said, well, that's impossible. How can we possibly manage that? How will I know that they're actually working? How will we actually get them to prove what they've done? And, you know, I've been fighting this, and then all of a sudden, when the world went weird, everybody did it, and we've shown it's not a problem. You know, we were told, you can't possibly chat with your GP online. No, we can't do that. And then all of a sudden, 48 hours later, we're all chatting with our GPs online. And the technology has shown us things can move very quickly if we want them to. We just have to make it happen, and we have to want it. And I know that you guys do, and we do. So
that's great. Thank you.
I'm going to add in on our impact data. We collect impact data every month on who we're working with, and the 2 out of the 4 elements that Charlie mentioned before, well-being and time management, are the 2 points that are moving most on the scale. So we saw a biggest improvement in people being able to manage their time since March than we've ever seen. But we also saw stress levels increase higher than we've seen since December. So December always peaks for stress. People find Christmas stressful. But normally it sort of stays on the same trajectory, and it's increased most. Other areas, we measure 14 areas altogether, have stayed pretty stable, but it's really interesting that those 2 elements of measuring how we are responding to working in this new way have moved so it's such a large number of percentage points away from their normal trajectory on both of those elements. So it's great we don't struggle with our time management potentially, but it's also not so good that it's impacting on our mental health through stress.
Thanks, Jackie, and it's great to see you monitoring it so closely as well. I think there's a lot we're going to learn from this, which brings me nicely to the title of the next slide, which is learning from the pandemic. So I think there's just 5 quick tips here around some of those initial insights. Charlie, are you going to run us through these?
Yes, of course. So what we've got here in number 1 is the transition to more remote support. And the good thing is that companies like AbilityNet, GeniusWithin are already ready to support people. So we've shifted most of our coaching remote, and that's worked really well. For those people who don't like Zoom, we've done telephone coaching. It's worth mentioning again, though, that technology is only a leveller if you have access to it. And so certainly, I know today we're talking about our employed clients, but some of our unemployed clients don't have the access to computers. So it's important that we do think about that going forward and what we can do about it to make sure that everybody can access things. So we've got providing choice and accepting that one size doesn't fit all. I think I've made that point, that no two people are the same. And the important thing is around flexibility, having it's flexibility all round, isn't it? It's flexibility in the managerial position, but it's also knowing that some of your colleagues might be experiencing things in a different way to you. And it's actually about asking the question, you know, what can I do to support you better? What do you need? And for some people, the support is actually helping them understand what adjustments might be available that they didn't know beforehand. So,
great. And I noticed you've got on there, notice the changes and also monitor those changes. As I say, you know, you guys are doing a really great job of actually collecting the data and some of those trends which we'll take forward from here. So yeah, I've got a slide here about how to create sustainable inclusion. So I was wondering if you could talk us through that.
So this is a really important slide for us as a company. So when I first started talking, I was talking about exclusion, and I was making the point that despite the Equality Act, we've actually not come that far. Having said that, there's a lot of good work being done at individual level, and that's the reactionary stuff. That's what we call compliance inclusion. So somebody needs some voice recognition software and they need some coaching, and so we give it to them, and that is complying with the Equality Act. Just very briefly, deliberate inclusion is when we seek to put certain people with certain conditions in certain jobs. So notably, that is, for example, people with autism being recruited by GCHQ or some of the tech firms. And what I would say about that is there's been little movement since we've seen those particular recruitment types. So, you know, where are the dyslexics? Why are we not recruiting for ADHD in the army and on the front line in A&E, for example? So there's work to be done there. But as a company, what we're interested in is helping organisations do systemic inclusion. So we data collect, as you said, and once you start data collecting over a whole organisation, then you can see actually what's the need for the environment in this office? Why are people in this team not getting promoted internally? And what's wrong with our recruitment strategies if we're not getting people through with these particular skills? So as an organisation, that's what we're doing in the new normal, with this idea that some of the teams are going to be in some of the time and some of them aren't. So for us, this is about universal design as well. You talked about that, you mentioned that at the start. And really looking at recruitment and promotion opportunities for people who are neurodiverse to make sure we're grabbing that talent.
And that, as in the context of our discussion today, that word sustainable and systemic, they're really important, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a social and moral imperative, as our CEO Nancy would say. So it's about making sure that we all utilise that talent.
Fantastic. So we've got our second poll now, which I will just launch for everybody. So this is just to find out from the people who are joining us today whether your employer is embracing these reasonable adjustments. So simple question, has your employer made reasonable adjustments to make it easier for you to work effectively? So simple yes or no. I can see the numbers changing. I'll just give it another maybe 30 seconds or so for everyone who wants to just have their say here, and then I'll try and remember to share the results this time. So just give it another 10 seconds or so. Seem to be getting quite stable now. So let me just share those results with everybody. So this is really heartening, actually. I'm sure Jackie and Charlie and my colleagues from AbilityNet will agree. So it says that 77% of cases of people who've joined us, an employer has made reasonable adjustments to make it easier to work. Still a little way to go with 24% of people saying no. So I'm sure that doesn't quite add up to 100%.
No, I'm not a mathematician, but
well, you know more than me. I don't know why that anomaly is. I'll have to look into that afterwards.
some people have gone yes and no.
Yeah, not sure about that. Anyway, but it's great to see that it's in favour of those reasonable adjustments having been made. So we'll just move on from here. So we've talked about this systemic approach. Tell us a bit more about the benefits that can come from embracing that.
So this for us is the business case behind the work that we do. So not only are we making sure that at an individual level people aren't struggling for any length of time, and obviously the mental health aspect of that, but when we work systemically on inclusion, we actually reduce the cost of it by 30%. So it's really expensive to get somebody like me to go in and do lots of assessments, and I don't need to do it. So as I said earlier, in education, we look for the problems and then you prove that somebody has these problems. But in actual fact, and this is a really important key message for anybody listening, the Equality Act does not require you to have a diagnosis of anything in order to get support. So with that in mind, we can save organisations a lot of money by going in before the problems happen and putting the adjustments in place.
Mm. And I think that echoes some of AbilityNet's thinking, in the sense that we would talk about inclusive design as being good for everybody. It's not just doing this stuff because you've got to. Actually, it creates a better environment and lots of benefit for everyone. Absolutely.
And I think, so we've just got a few more stats for people to look at. And I'm just going to hand back over to Jackie to talk about some of the stuff that we're doing at the moment.
Hi, Jackie.
So yes, I mean these stats speak for themselves really, and this all this information will come out afterwards. But there is a huge business imperative for companies and organisations to take on board systemic inclusion. That there is a great loss when we don't all work at our best for ourselves and for the businesses that we work for. So if we just finally move on to our last slide. Okay. What we just wanted to share is how we've adapted, and obviously since March, and as Charlie said, everything went a bit strange in the world. We've had a call for different types of work and an approach, and obviously along with everybody else looking at how we can deliver services in a remote context. So there's new models of coaching that are being delivered, which are called iGenius, based on individual coaching sessions that can be delivered via this technology, and they're blended with some online modules as well to support people through whatever their objectives are. Also working with companies, and actually many companies that we've talked to are using this pause to re-examine policy, because really truly you can't work on a systemic inclusion approach without some central policy being addressed, and how you recruit and how you manage your team. So that often starts with awareness training, so teams and groups understanding neurodiversity and the strengths and the benefits that it brings to business. So we've been running those groups remotely as well, and actually using things like Zoom, where you can break out into different groups and do some individual work and come back, has actually worked incredibly well. So we've gone into this learning how we can deliver this work in a remote context in an ongoing way as well. And also sometimes we get asked how to start the conversation. If I need reasonable adjustments, how do I even begin? And actually we have a free adjustment screener on our website, which I've just noted the address for there, and that's 65 questions that you can answer that might help you just start that conversation internally as to what might be useful to help you work at your best within your business, or if you're a business, to consider what you might want to think about providing that will help your teams continue to work at their best as we stay in this new normal, or next normal, as Charlie put it.
That's great. Thanks for that, Jackie. And I think, again, you've touched on those themes around flexibility, using Zoom to the fullness of its ability. You know, it doesn't mean you have to be in a big room with everyone. You can do those breakout sessions, and also that kind of one-to-one support and adapting to individuals' needs. And it's great to see you guys doing that in the move towards this next normal. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to launch our third and final poll. Okay. So this is just to find out, and it comes back to some of what Charlie was saying earlier, you know, have things improved for you? So has your work-life balance improved during lockdown? I know that's quite a generalization, but it'd just be great to hear whether the answer to that is yes, no, or no change in the context of the discussion that we've been having today. So again, I'll just allow a few seconds for people to get their head around that question and pop in a response there, and thank you for taking part. This one's moving really quick. Just give it another few seconds to make sure everyone has a fair chance. Okay, so we seem to be stabilizing there. So I'll just end the poll and share those results. And for 58% of people, it looks like work-life balance has improved despite juggling animals and children in the house. 30% of people are saying no, and 12% of people are saying no change. So I guess that reinforces some of what we've been talking about today. So great, thank you. So now I just want to welcome my colleague Teresa, who is going to talk about something that we've been adapting to help support people who may have moved to working from home. So Teresa, welcome. Perhaps you'd just like to give us an overview of how AbilityNet can support people working from home and introduce us to the new Working from Home review.
Hello, so my name is Teresa Loftus. So I deliver workplace assessments and disabled student assessments, and we've started to do those remotely. So that's using Teams, and so that's a face-to-face assessment that we can provide. And a new service that we have developed is called Working from Home Review. So that's a 30-minute session with an experienced workplace assessor, and it will help to identify some solutions to the barriers that you might be experiencing while you're working in this new working environment of home. So we're not used to sort of always being in this environment. It's changed, and there's some different things that you might need to consider. So that review will help you look at some of those issues that you would be experiencing, and that could be to do with your workstation setup. It could be looking at your seat in your chair. It might be to do with how you're using your computer, whether there's any adjustments that could be implemented. And those could be free solutions, or they could be low cost, or something that might be a little bit more longer term. So there's a whole host of things that we can look at and discuss with you. It's quite a good session actually, that should feel quite relaxed. And if you don't like having a face-to-face session, you can turn your camera off. We can still chat to you whilst you're having those discussions with us.
That's great. And as Jackie said about their service, it kind of works as a conversation starter as well, doesn't it? So what are some of the recommendations that may come out of that? Can you give us a couple of examples based on the experience of working on those services?
So when we're thinking about so the ergonomic side of things, it could be looking at how you're placing your equipment to make it most sort of ergonomic, comfortable for you, so that it doesn't exacerbate any of your conditions. It's going to be a short-term solution, we hope, for some of us. Sometimes it might not be, and you might have to have another review at a later point if it's going to be longer term. But that could be things like lap trays and things that will help you sit a little bit better, or lumbar support, or even down to specialist seating. Then if we have a look at the software, it could be that we are discussing the free solutions that are built into Microsoft Office, things like Dictate or Speak, or using the spell checking facilities, or My Computer My Way helps us, from AbilityNet, helps us adapt the screens and the computer environment, and you could link in with that as well. There's a whole host of things out there, but you might not be aware of it, and as an assessor we can help pinpoint those areas for you.
That's great, and I'm really pleased you've mentioned My Computer My Way. When I joined the organisation, I was really impressed with it, because it just goes down to such a granular level, but you can enter it at a high level and start off by looking at problems with vision, but you can go right down to specific tasks on there, and it's very easy to find specific practical tips, isn't it, for people if they need that kind of help.
It's really helpful. It's really helpful, and we do recommend it quite a lot. And it's something that you can find that will work with the operating system, or even the mobile phones or tablets that you're using as well. So it's not just always focusing on maybe a laptop.
And I think it's important to say that. I know I've put here what types of adjustments might employers need to make. I think sometimes there's that preconception, isn't there, that once you start talking about reasonable assessments, it's suddenly going to cost an employer a lot of money, or it's going to be like a real headache for them. But as both organisations have said, it's about starting that dialogue, and actually the devices that people have already, if you just go under the hood of it, actually just by allowing that flexibility or a little bit of education, it's quite simple to have those interventions. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
I totally agree with it. And I would say that when somebody comes to talk to you about the barriers that they're experiencing, that you're always talking about the problems that they have. And by the time you've finished having those discussions, the weight has been lifted from their shoulders, and you usually have somebody that's going away with a smile on their face, because you've identified things that are easy to implement and that will make them productive and help them achieve what they want to do within the workplace. So that means they're going to be productive, and that's a win-win for both people.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, I think from hopefully what people have seen from today's webinar from both organisations is that it's quite a solutions-focused approach. It's not about identifying problems with individuals, or it's about looking at how people can work together to make those improvements. So thank you very much, Teresa. There are a couple of slides here which I'm not going to read out, but for anyone who gets the email afterwards, if you want more details on what AbilityNet has spoken about during the webinar, we've got lots of links here, and previously in the slide deck there's those links that Jackie and Charlie have shared as well to their services, and everybody will receive an email with links to that afterwards. There are some specific blogs and fact sheets from ourselves which are all free to access as well, so please do take the time to have a look at these at your own pace. And there are also some links here for GeniusWithin to their social media, as well as the information that they've shared earlier, and a nice sum up of what they've discussed earlier, that phrase again coming up that Charlie mentioned earlier: inclusion is a moral, social and economic imperative, and that we all lose out when human potential is squandered. I think that's a really nice way to finish our formal section of this, and then we've just got, I'm going to do a quick time check, about 5 minutes for some Q&A. So I'll just pop in, there's a lot of messages in here, which is great to see this level of engagement. So there's a question here which says, do you have a view on how neurodiverse individuals from BAME backgrounds are differentially impacted compared to the majority community? Do you offer and support adjustments for the additional barriers faced in society for BAME ND workers? I don't know whether Charlie and Jackie have got any views on that. Very topical at this time.
It is very topical, and it's a really good question. And the fact of the matter is that I don't have specific data behind that, so I don't want to speculate. But I think that you know, one of the most important things is that you have a good representation of coaches to support people from all backgrounds, and certainly that's something that we have worked on quite hard at GeniusWithin to make sure that we're representative.
Great, thank you. And there's a question here from Patrick: if you could develop a culture of universal design, are there any good pointers towards resources online to help me as an employer? So I don't know if GeniusWithin have got anything to say about that.
Sure. So, universal design. It was Universal Music that just released something, wasn't it, Jackie? Were you? I wasn't at the launch, but were you?
Yeah. Yeah. So our CEO, Dr. Nancy Doyle, actually contributed to Universal Music's piece on working with neurodiverse employees, and there's a whole book that they've written, which is actually beautiful. It looks lovely. It's really accessible. The point is that many of the adjustments, and I think that's been mentioned by both groups here today, many of the adjustments are those that benefit everybody. So they are put in place to support those who are neurodiverse, but they are to the benefit of the whole organisation. And actually things like flexibility that we've talked about, and flexibility in remote working, we've just been through the largest social experiment of how remote working can work. And actually, we've had to do that. And it's proved the point for many employers that we can work remotely and successfully. And whether or not we choose to do that long term, when things do come onto the next normal or the normal after that, then we can take that on board. But I think universal design comes from when we take on board those changes that can benefit most people most of the time. And they are things that don't cost a lot of money, actually, often.
And I'd just like to echo everything you said, but also to say that from the perspective of universal design, so AbilityNet has a team of accessibility consultants for helping companies ensure that their websites are meeting that inclusive design as well. And I think that's a need that, like everything else we've spoken about today, that's really been amplified by the time that we live in. You know, are supermarket websites accessible for people who've become far more dependent on them? Can you access public services at this time? Have those services been designed with accessibility in mind? You know, and that's something that I guess in some ways is taken for granted, but once you again start looking into it, there's lots of things that can be exclusive there. And actually by being inclusive, you're just opening up your services to a much larger population. So that's an interesting two different takes on that question. So hopefully that's helpful to you there, Patrick. I'm just going to see, oh, here's a nice question just to maybe finish on. My cat has joined me too. Are there any studies on how working at home with your pets support animals and how they can be good for the well-being of neurodiverse workers? Charlie, you got any data on that, or Jackie, any thoughts?
Well, again, I can speculate, but no, I don't have data on that. My anecdotal evidence is that my dog has got serious separation anxiety, but I don't want to start diagnosing animals, so...
Okay, great. Well, I can speak from personal experience as well and say that time out with my dog has been really helpful at this time. So I'm just going to do a very quick time check. I think we're more or less there because we did schedule this to that classic hour that Charlie talked about earlier. You can find, just to finish, you can find details of future webinars from ourselves following the link, which again will be sent out afterwards. And next week, as I said, we will be looking at a different perspective on neurodiversity and how people are staying connected on a social level in creative ways. So actually be looking at things like art and writing around that. So do please have a look at that as well. And I will just take my final minute, because these sessions end very abruptly, just to say a huge thank you to everyone who's joined us today, either as an attendee and also the partners and my colleagues who've joined us today. Thank you ever so much. It always feels like there's not enough time and there's much more that we could have said. But thank you to Rina for sharing your experiences. Thank you, Charlie and Jackie, and thank you to Teresa for also sharing how we've been adapting during this time. So watch out for the follow-up email, and thanks again, everybody. And we'll hopefully see you on another webinar. And if this has been useful and you are able to donate and support AbilityNet to continue with the webinars and the work that we're doing, there's a link here as well. So thank you very much, and bye everybody. Take care.